Every city the Spartan army has entered in this series had one thing in common, a single geographic feature that defined the entire campaign. Baltimore had Fort McHenry, Los Angeles had the aqueduct, London had the Roman Wall, Chicago had the river. Miami has something none of those cities had. Miami doesn't have one geographic feature. Miami is a geographic feature. It is a city built entirely on water, on a shallow subtropical bay, on barrier islands separated from the mainland by Biscayne Bay, on causeways that are the only land connections between the mainland and the islands where 3 million people live. Remove the causeways and Miami Beach is an island. Remove the water management infrastructure and Miami floods. Remove the air conditioning and Miami becomes uninhabitable within days. The Spartan general who has campaigned through Baltimore, Los Angeles, London, and Chicago has never encountered a city whose entire existence is this contingent on this many systems working simultaneously. He is about to. 10,000 Spartan warriors have crossed into Florida from the north and are moving south on I-95 toward a city that should be underwater, and isn't, yet. The Spartan column moves south through Florida in June, the beginning of hurricane season, the hottest and most humid month in one of the hottest and most humid states in America. The Spartan soldiers are from the Peloponnese, the southern peninsula of Greece, a Mediterranean climate of hot, dry summers and mild winters. They know heat. What they do not know is humidity. The air in South Florida in June contains more moisture per cubic meter than almost anywhere in the ancient Mediterranean world. The Spartan engineering officer's log from the Florida approach contains an entry that the NSA interpreter chain translates with some difficulty. It reads, "The air here is not air. It is water that has not yet decided to fall." The column arrives at the northern edge of Miami-Dade County at 6 a.m. The general receives his first detailed scout report of the city's geography and calls his senior officers together immediately. He spreads the aerial imagery on the ground in front of them. He points to Biscayne Bay separating the mainland from the barrier islands. He points to the 3 main causeways, the MacArthur, the Venetian, the Julia Tuttle, as the only land connections between them. He says, "This city has built itself on islands connected by bridges." Who does that? One of his officers says, "People who trust the bridges." The general says, "Or people who trust the water." The Florida National Guard activates at 5:47 a.m. when drone surveillance detects the Spartan column on I-95 north of Miami. The Florida Guard's 53rd Infantry Brigade combat team begins mobilizing from its bases across South Florida. The Miami-Dade Police Department activates its Emergency Operations Center. The mayor of Miami issues a shelter-in-place order at 6:02 a.m. for the city's population of 470,000, though the greater Miami metropolitan area of 6.2 million people makes full shelter-in-place logistically comparable to Los Angeles. The evacuation order for Miami Beach specifically, the barrier island connected to the mainland by 3 causeways, goes out at 6:15 a.m. The strategic logic is immediate and obvious to every military planner in the room. If the causeways are held by the Spartans, Miami Beach becomes an island. 90,000 people on a barrier island with no land exit and 3 bridge choke points is not a defensible civilian population. Miami Beach needs to empty before the Spartans reach the causeways. The causeways are 45 minutes away at the column's current pace. The math is not comfortable. The Spartan vanguard reaches downtown Miami at 7:30 a.m. and the general's first view of the city from ground level stops him for 4 minutes. Downtown Miami is unlike any city core he has seen in this series. It faces Biscayne Bay directly. The downtown skyline sitting at the water's edge, Bayfront Park and Museum Park running along the shoreline, the bay stretching east to the barrier islands with the causeways visible as thin lines of concrete crossing the water. Across the bay, Miami Beach's own skyline rises from the barrier island, a second city visible from the first, separated by 2 miles of shallow subtropical water. The general looks at the bay. He looks at the causeways. He looks at Miami Beach across the water. He says to his engineering officer, "There are 2 cities here." The engineering officer says, "Yes, General, connected by 3 bridges." The general says, "Who controls the bridges controls both cities." The engineering officer says, "Yes, General." The general says, "Secure the causeways." All 3. Now, the race to the Causeways is the most tactically urgent moment of any Spartan campaign in this series. The Florida Guard has the same instinct as the general. Whoever controls the MacArthur, Venetian, and Julia Tuttle Causeways controls the movement between the mainland and Miami Beach. Guard units are moving toward the Causeways from 3 directions simultaneously. The Spartan column is moving from downtown toward the same objectives. The MacArthur Causeway, the southernmost and most direct route to South Beach, becomes the critical point. The Guard reaches the MacArthur Causeway Weston entrance at 8:14 a.m. The Spartan vanguard reaches it at 8:22 a.m. 8 minutes. The Guard has 8 minutes to establish a defensive position on the causeway before the Spartans arrive. 8 minutes is enough to get soldiers on the bridge. It is not enough to fortify it. The Spartan phalanx hits the Guard position on the MacArthur Causeway at 8:22 a.m., and the engagement that follows is the most intense direct confrontation of any campaign in the series. Not because of casualties, but because of geography. The causeway is 120 feet wide. The Spartan phalanx at full width fills it completely. There is no room to flank. There is no room to maneuver. It is a straight line of shields and spears on a bridge over Biscayne Bay, and the only direction is forward. The Spartans control all 3 causeways by 10 a.m. The Guard falls back to Miami Beach across the MacArthur Causeway before the Spartans can close the eastern end. 200 Guard soldiers now on the barrier island with the causeways behind them held by Spartan units. Miami Beach is not empty. The evacuation order came too late for the full 90,000 residents to clear the island, and an estimated 30,000 people remain. The general, receiving the report that Guard forces have retreated to Miami Beach, and the island still has a significant civilian population, makes the same decision he made at the Los Angeles aqueduct. He does not close the causeways to civilian movement. He holds them militarily, no Guard reinforcements, no military vehicles, but he keeps them open to civilian foot traffic in both directions. The decision is communicated to the Florida Guard commander through the interpreter chain within the hour. The Guard commander reads it twice. Then he says to his staff, he's holding the bridges but letting the civilians through. His staff officer says, "Why?" The Guard commander says, "Because he's already won the military objective. The civilians are not his objective." The Spartan camp is established in Lummus Park, the strip of green space running along Ocean Drive on South Beach, between the Art Deco hotels of the most famous beachfront in America and the Atlantic Ocean. It is, from a purely tactical perspective, an unusual camp location, exposed on the ocean side, with the Art Deco district immediately to the west. But the general chose it for the same reason every general in this series has chosen their camp location. It is the most defensible open ground available on Miami Beach, with clear observation in every direction and the Atlantic Ocean as an impassable eastern boundary. The Spartan camp on South Beach, red cloaks and bronze armor against the backdrop of the pastel Art Deco hotels of Ocean Drive. The Atlantic Ocean behind them, palm trees inside the camp perimeter, produces the most visually striking imagery of any campaign in the series. The photographs are on the front page of every newspaper in the world by noon. A Spartan phalanx in formation on the same beach, where people normally drink cocktails at sunset, is, visually, the most absurd and magnificent thing the modern world has produced. Miami, characteristically, starts selling t-shirts within 6 hours. The general's Day 2 reconnaissance of Miami Beach is the most disorienting personal reconnaissance of his entire campaign. He has walked Hollywood Boulevard. He has walked the City of London. He has walked the Loop. Nothing prepared him for Ocean Drive at 9 a.m. in June. Miami Beach is a city that exists entirely in sensory excess. The heat, the color, the music audible from every direction, the architecture that looks like nothing in the ancient or modern world, the population that represents more nationalities per square mile than almost any place on Earth. The general walks Ocean Drive with his escort and his interpreter and stops at the same things a first-time visitor to Miami Beach always stops at: the color of the buildings, the scale of the hotels, the particular quality of the light off the water. He stops outside the Versace Mansion on Ocean Drive, the Mediterranean Revival Palazzo that is one of the most famous private residences in America, and looks at the facade for 3 minutes. His interpreter explains what it is. The general asks, "One person lived here?" The interpreter confirms. The general looks at it again. He says, "We would have considered this excessive." His interpreter says, "Most people do." The general says, "And yet it exists." The interpreter says, "This is Miami." The general nods slowly. He says, "I am beginning to understand." The strategic dimension the general identified on day 1 becomes the central issue of day 3. Port Miami, located on Dodge Island between the mainland and Miami Beach, accessible via the Port Boulevard Bridge, is the busiest cruise port in the world. 7 million cruise passengers pass through it annually. It also handles significant cargo operations connecting South Florida to the Caribbean, Latin America, and beyond. The Spartan units controlling the MacArthur Causeway are 400 meters from the Port Miami entrance. The economic disruption of Spartan forces controlling the approaches to the world's busiest cruise port is measurable within 24 hours, 14 crews. Ships have diverted to Fort Lauderdale. The cruise industry's stock prices have dropped 18%, and the Caribbean economies that depend on Miami cruise traffic are sending diplomatic messages to Washington within 48 hours of the landing. The general, receiving the intelligence report on Port Miami's economic significance, calls his engineering officer. He asks, "What is the deepest water in Biscayne Bay?" The engineering officer says, "The port channel, dredged to 50 feet for the cruise ships." The general says, "The Romans built their empire on sea trade. The Spartans built theirs on land. But I understand what a port means. Leave it open." The negotiation opens at the Perez Art Museum, Miami, the waterfront contemporary art museum on Biscayne Bay, whose open-air terraces overlook the bay, the Causeways, and the Miami Beach skyline. The Florida governor and the U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security represent the American side. The Spartan general attends with 4 officers. The setting, a modern art museum on a subtropical bay, is the most visually incongruous negotiating venue of any campaign in the series. And the general spends 8 minutes looking at the art in the lobby before the formal session begins. He stops in front of a large abstract canvas, deep reds and blacks, geometric forms. He looks at it for the full 8 minutes. His interpreter, who has learned not to rush him, waits. The general finally says, "Is this meant to represent something?" The interpreter asks the museum curator standing nearby. The curator explains the artist's intention. The interpreter translates. The general considers it. He says, "In Sparta, we did not make art like this." The curator asks through the interpreter, "What did you make?" The general says, "We made soldiers." The curator says, "And which lasts longer?" The general looks at the painting. Then he looks out at the bay. He says, "Ask me again in 2,000 years. On day 6, the general walks from the Lummus Park camp to the water's edge of the Atlantic Ocean and stands at the shore. He has stood at the Pacific in Los Angeles. He has stood at Lake Michigan in Chicago. He has stood at the Thames and the Patapsco. But the Atlantic is different from all of them because the Atlantic is the ocean the ancient world knew. The Phoenicians sailed it. The Carthaginians explored it. The Romans called it the mare externum, the outer sea, the edge of the known world. The Spartans knew of it. They never sailed it. The general standing at the Atlantic shore on Miami Beach in June 2026 is standing at the edge of a sea his civilization knew, existed but never reached. He removes his helmet. The wind off the Atlantic in June is warm and carries salt. He stands there for 9 minutes. His officers stand behind him in silence. Then he says, "We knew this was here, we just never came." One of his officers says, "We're here now." The general puts his helmet back on. He says, "Yes, better late than never." He turns back toward the camp. The withdrawal agreement is signed at the Perez Art Museum on day 8. The terms are the simplest of any campaign in the series. The Spartans leave. The Causeways reopen fully. Port Miami resumes normal operations. The general asks for one thing. He asks that the city of Miami commission a permanent marker at the spot on the Atlantic shore where he stood on day 6. Not a monument, not a statue, just a marker in the ground indicating where a Spartan general stood at the edge of the ocean his civilization never reached. The Florida governor agrees. The mayor of Miami Beach agrees with considerably more enthusiasm. The marker, she calculates within 30 seconds of hearing the request, will become one of the most visited spots on South Beach within a year. The general signs the withdrawal agreement. and walks out of the museum onto the waterfront terrace. He looks across Biscayne Bay at the Miami skyline one last time. The withdrawal march retraces the Causeway route, back across the MacArthur Causeway to the mainland, north through downtown Miami, north on I-95 out of the city. The Spartan column leaving Miami on I-95 passes a billboard for a luxury condominium development. The billboard reads, "Live where others vacation." The general's interpreter, riding in the vehicle beside him, points it out and translates. The general reads it. He says nothing for a long time. Then he says, "That is either the most confident thing I have ever read or the most foolish." His interpreter says, "In Miami, General, it is usually both. Every city taught the Spartans something. Baltimore taught them that courage can be set to music. Los Angeles taught them that a civilization can be built on the decision to stay. London showed them what their rivals built. Chicago showed them a city that absorbs everything thrown at it and keeps running. Miami taught them something different from all of those. Something that could only be learned in a city built below sea level on a subtropical bay, at the edge of the Atlantic Ocean, in the most hurricane-prone region of the United States. Miami taught them that there is a kind of courage that looks nothing like courage from the outside. The Spartan idea of courage was standing in a phalanx at Thermopylae, shields locked, holding a pass against 100 Zeusan soldiers because retreating was not an option. Miami's idea of courage is building a city on land that floods, in heat that kills, on a coastline that gets hit by hurricanes, in a region that climate scientists have been warning for 30 years is going to be underwater eventually, and building it anyway, and filling it with art and music and color, and people from every country on Earth, and selling T-shirts when an ancient army shows up, because what else are you going to do? The general, who stood at the Atlantic shore with his helmet off, understood something in that moment that no military briefing could have told him. Miami is not a city that endures despite its circumstances. It is a city that thrives because of them. Subscribe, because the Spartan series continues and we haven't run out of cities yet.